Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another wonderful history lesson from the 1950s era. Jackie, take it away.
Hello, thank you everyone for joining us, and please do check the lower screen. That purple ribbon with the white banner goes across the bottom, and it says www.whilethewindmillwatch.com. And we'd like to have you go there for information concerning the authors, the vendors of our book, which you see in the upper corner, the where we might be located as far as are we signing books here or when, and also all the previous 1950s fun chats. Just go to www.While the Windmill Watched. The book, While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s, is what was the impetus for this chat. So let's get started. As with many successful individuals, our guest, Bert Mayer, grew up on a farm. He was born on June 27, 1942, 4 miles southeast of Streator, North Dakota, and attended rural and small town schools. As a youth, he had the advantage of being surrounded by an extended family, which influenced him greatly. Bert attended the German Neudorf Lutheran Church, which had been established by his grandparents in 1903, who were immigrants from the German-Russian area, now part of the Ukraine. After high school graduation from Streator, he enrolled in the engineering program at the University of North Dakota. However, he soon realized that he was more interested in agriculture, so he transferred to North Dakota State University and majored in vocational agricultural education. After graduating, his teaching career began, and a career he thoroughly enjoyed. His degree qualified him for many other positions in the agricultural field. However, in 1981, he left vocational education and he started a career in Bismarck with Aid Association for Lutheran Insurance, later known as Thrivent Financial. On May 31st of 2011, he retired from that career. Today, he works with a small number of senior citizens with their Medicare insurances. Bert married Sharon Green on June 27, 1975. They have 4 children, 5 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. So, Bert, we welcome you to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Good morning.
Hello.
So, since each generation is influenced by previous generations, what can you tell us about any of those influences from your family? For instance, were there things your family did that were unique to your family in your rural community?
Well, I think the thing that was unique about my family, I mean, I grew up on the family farm home, and most of the farms at that time, they had what was known as 32-volt electricity, very low voltage. Most of the rooms in the house were lit with a bulb screwed into a fixture in the ceiling. And very little bit of the outbuildings had electricity. My parents were really fortunate in that my father and his brother, they lived really close to the main line from Ottertail Power Company that came from Gackle to Streator, powered those 2 communities. My dad and his brother, they paid the Ottertail people to run a power line down there. And then they were able to have 110-volt electricity, which is still very common today, except today, of course, that has also been expanded to 240 volts so that we can operate ranges and higher electric consuming equipment. So I never realized the importance of generators. My relatives, aunts and uncles, all of the others, they would have what is called a wind charger, which was similar to a windmill. It just stuck up in the ground, up from the ground. And when the wind blew, it produced electricity and the lights came on. Now, at that time, just like today, they made attempts to store some of that electricity so that when the wind didn't blow, they would have power. Well, we were never faced with that. I never grew up in a
Yes.
home, with just 30 volts of electricity. Yeah.
Yes. So how was that electricity stored, Bert, and then be able to capture it and use it in your home or
Sure.
on the farm?
What they did, most of them would have a row of batteries in the basement, kept in the basement so that they would not freeze. And so then as extra electricity was produced when the wind blew, it was stored in those batteries. And then when the wind didn't blow, hopefully there was enough energy stored in those batteries so that it would continue to power the place. Yeah.
Okay. And so that was, you had electricity for your home, but nothing for the buildings outside.
Basically, well, yes, we did have it for the buildings outside.
Okay.
I remember my parents had electric milking machines, electric separators, and those were all out into the barn. And my dad had a small shop, and the electricity went over there as well. But the interesting thing is refrigerators. The people in Gackle and Streeter, the town people, they had refrigerators. My parents could have had refrigerators, but I think they were concerned that people would think they were too stolz, too proud. And so they didn't get refrigerators until rural electrification came in the late 1940s, and everybody got refrigerators.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the old ice box had to go sit someplace else.
It sure did. And my dad had built a unique storage structure. It was a little house between the windmill and the stock watering tank. So the cold water that came up out of the well always went into that little house. And that's where they would hang cream, milk, anything that they wanted to keep cool was kept in there. And as far as frozen things, very, very little. Lot of canning. Most of the housewives were canning. Yes.
Right.
In that area of North Dakota, there were not a lot of trees. So in that time, if people needed ice, or maybe even before that time, if they needed ice, how did they acquire it?
I think the only thing would be to go and chop it off of a slough or a lake in the winter time. And I think that was seldom done. They just made do without ice. Cooling water, and that was about the extent of it.
Okay.
Okay. So I mentioned earlier that your grandparents came from an area of Russia that is now Ukraine. Can you recall any stories they may have shared with you about their life there?
I actually can't. Being one of the younger grandchildren, didn't get much chance to visit with my grandparents. In fact, my maternal grandparents, the Millers, they moved to California about the same time that I was born. And my grandmother was bedridden. Grandpa Miller, he would come back to visit, but he would be busy visiting because he had lots of children around there yet. And when we got together, there were a lot of cousins to play with, so we would play with the cousins and so forth. My grandpa Mayer, he, of course, lived in Gackle, and I did get to know my grandma Meyer just a little bit, but she died too when I was about 6 years old. Grandpa Meyer, now he did live with his children, I think, for at least 2 years. He'd spend a month. He had 11 children. Move on from there.
That helped with the calendar, didn't it?
Convenient.
Yeah, but I'd have to say, as far as me sitting down and having a conversation with my grandparents, not much of that happened. I would sometimes listen when some of the aunts and uncles came to visit, and then I'd listen to the conversation between them and my grandparents, but never really talked about life in Russia.
I see. Okay.
Tell us, you use the name Mayer and Meyer interchangeably. Can you tell us why that is?
Well, I think Mayer is just more typical as far as the pronunciation is concerned, because there are other Meyers who spell it M-A-I-E-R or M-E-Y-E-R. Yeah. So Mayer just seems, and yet in German it would have been Moyer, and I guess that was the same for everybody. Yes.
Mm. Okay.
Mhm.
So let's just skip on to before we go to the 50s, let's go to the 30s. How did the dirty 30s affect you, if you can recall?
Well, I cannot, of course, because I was born in 1942.
Well, I
But-
bet did your parents, they went through it, but did their going through it influence you? That's what I should have
Well,
said.
I'm sure it did as far as conservation was concerned.
Mhm.
I mean, as children, just like we did when we talked to Carl Wagner on his interview, he was a farm child during the 1930s, and yet he said on the farm that didn't seem to affect them because they always raised enough food, they always had food to eat, and yet I'm sure the parents had to be concerned.
Mhm.
Many of them did lose their farms at that time. But I think, if anything, well, it taught me the merits of hard work and conservation.
Okay.
Did your parents use soil conservation or methods, or wind conservation methods, or what types of conservation did they do then? Did they employ on their farm?
Actually, at that time, there wasn't a lot of conservation, although I know that we did plant a wind shelter belt around the farm, to protect it.
Mhm.
Now, we never got involved with planting shelter belts out in the fields and so forth. In fact, if anything, soil conservation probably wasn't very good because, in the fall of the year, the crop land would be plowed. In spring, it would be cultivated and then seeded. In fact, one thing from the dirty 30s that I remember, back in those days, if you had horses, you always had to have a fence on your side of the pasture. And if the neighbors had horses in their pasture, they'd have to have a fence also so that the horses couldn't get together. Otherwise, they would tangle. And in fact, I know we had one situation where a neighbor didn't have that fence, and one of our horses really got cut badly in the barbed wire fence. But in that fence row where you had two barbed wire fences, and of course weeds would grow up, from the dirty 30s, there would be sand mounds in fence rows, yes. And they were present until eventually they took those fence rows down and cultivated through them.
Yeah.
Okay. I tend to hear more, at least this is my experience, about the dirty 30s and the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. How was it in North Dakota? If you know any of the story of that, was it as bad in North and South Dakota as it was in that Oklahoma state?
I would think not as bad, and again, I don't have hands-on experience, but in visiting with Carl Wagner about the Civilian Conservation Corps, which came into effect in the 1930s, job opportunities were very limited. And President Roosevelt at that time, instituted those two programs so that there was work for some of the young men. And with the WPA, Workers' Progress Administration, there was also work for the young farmers. They worked on their farm, and then during the day they would do road construction. So basically that created some work and some income so that these young men could have jobs. But as Carl Wagner pointed out, he was paid $30 a month, but $25 every month had to go back to his parents.
Right.
That was important to maintain and keep the farm.
Yes.
Yes.
So let's move on to the 40s and your decade. Were any people in your family involved in World War II? And if so, what can you tell us about that?
No, none as far as I could tell were involved in World War II. I did have an uncle who gave his life in World War I. The influence that had on my family, I remember that Memorial Day was always celebrated. The American Legion in Gackle or Streator, they would always have programs, a noon meal, and so forth. They would always remember the veterans on Memorial Day. In fact, the American Legion post in Gackle was named after that uncle of mine and a cousin who gave their lives in World War One. It was called the Meyer Morlock American Legion Post.
Uh-huh.
So that was always important for my parents.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
we learned how important that was also.
Right.
When I was in high school, our band would usually perform during the Memorial Day services.
Mhm.
Yes. Did you decorate graves then in your local area?
Yes, not a great deal. The graves would be visited, but not decorated with flowers or wreaths like they are today. You know, somebody would probably put a plant out there or something to that effect, but not as much as we decorate graves today. But Memorial Day was observed.
Yes.
Okay. So let's go on to the 50s, and I'm going to talk now about the mechanization of farm equipment. That expanded in the 50s. And so how did this affect your family's farm practices?
Well, I think, again, I really missed most of the work with horses. As I was getting old enough to help with the farm work, about the only work done with horses anymore was raking hay. But I can imagine how important that was. It makes me think of today when we are thinking about robots and artificial intelligence, how big a change that is. My goodness, how big a change that must have been back from the 30s into the 40s when they converted from horses because they no longer had enough young men and ladies out there to farm with horses. You know, so all of a sudden, instead of a one-bottom plow drawn by horses, now they could at least have a two-bottom plow. And that tractor could run around the clock if needed. Whereas horses, yeah, you could only work them so many hours a day. And then you had to stop, get them back home, feed them, let them rest. So again, they could work the next day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good point. Good point. So anything else with farm equipment mechanization?
Well, I guess I think of the handling of hay.
Okay.
You know, again, with the horses, yeah, they could rake, but then basically the hay would have to be pitched by hand onto a hay rack, and then they would take it from the hay rack and they would build a stack probably back at home at the farm. I can just imagine how tractors started mechanizing it. I mean, the first movement to tractors was just something to pull that tillage equipment. But then along came hydraulics, and all of a sudden, here you had a farmhand loader attachment on a tractor. You could pick up that hay from a windrow, and you could raise it up, and you could put it onto a stack. My goodness, what a improvement that had to have been.
Did your family ever put loose hay up in the hay mow?
Yes, we did that. Initially, there would be a larger door on the hay mow, and then on the hay rack, there were slings. There were two slings, and the top sling would be pulled off first, and there would be a long cable. It would come out to the hay rack in front of the barn. And then on the back of the barn, initially there were horses, eventually tractors. And then that would pull the hay into, two slings at a time. And then eventually when grapple forks came along, I remember my dad just taking that grapple fork and putting the hay into that hay loft.
Did you have to move the hay around up in there once it got up there?
Yes, definitely. If you wanted to fill the hay mow, now we did not have a big, large hay mow on the farm, so we ended up having to put hay in all year long. But yeah, you know, they had those big hip roof barns.
Yes.
Can't imagine how much movement of that hay had to be done to fill that barn. And I think in most instances, it would last all winter long.
Did you keep livestock in your barn all winter, or were they allowed to go outside?
It depended. Now, my folks always milked cows. And those cows, of course, they were kept in the barn. The only reason they were put outside was to let them go to the stock tank and drink water. and then they would come back in. But then the beef cattle, there was a barn that they could go into if the weather was bad, but they were always fed outside.
Okay. Bert, do you remember any blizzards affecting your farm?
I do, not so much, not real serious ones as I was growing up at home. But of course, every time there was a blizzard, you would have to move snow. I remember my dad made a kind of a portable snowplow drawn by horses. And my brother and we would have to take this thing and hold it up straight and then pull the snow away. Then when we got to where they wanted to dump it, we would let go and they would pull it over and we'd go back and get some more snow.
Oh,
Wow. Kind of like moving hay.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Your father had 2 farm hands right there.
Yes.
right.
That had to be a cold job.
Right.
It was.
Yeah. Considering the boots, you probably had buckle overshoes on your shoes and there was no insulation. And your feet became a block of ice.
Yep. They got to be very, very cold. Yes.
Oh, so let's go on to your career. What qualities would you say were developed when you were raised on the farm that supported your teaching career?
Well, I think first a little bit about my elementary education.
Okay.
That taught me, that I needed to sit and learn. We had a lot of memorization. And back then it was basically reading, writing, and arithmetic is basically all that we could learn. But we learned that in school, and that carried on to my career. My high school education, again, was really very limited. We had 4 instructors. So again, basically we got the math, the sciences, the English, and I forget the 4th one, but anyway, we didn't have science. Yeah. And business. Yeah. We had
business. Oh.
Yes. But we didn't have the vocational courses that are available today. Very limited background as far as education is concerned.
Yeah.
So when I went off to college, I basically had to start again with remedial math, remedial sciences, because I just did not have the teachers qualified necessarily to teach like chemistry and physics or algebra. Those courses I was never taught in high school. So I had to make up for that when I went to college.
Bert, did you ever have classes in music or was there music
or art
as just an activity given at either your country school or town school?
At the country school, a little bit of music. I think our teacher, she could play the piano and we would sing, and we would generally have a Christmas program, so we would actually perform. But then as I got to go to school in Streator after my 2 years of country school, we had a local pastor who could lead and instruct the band. He was not one of the teachers, but we had a band. So I started out playing a trumpet. And as we moved on, I moved on to the baritone. And pretty soon they needed a tuba player. So tuba player.
You got your workout.
Yeah.
Are there different with among those 3 instruments? Are there differences as far as key signatures that you have to understand before you can move from play one instrument or to another?
Basically not. I mean, they were all treble clef with the 3 keys.
Okay.
But my lip structure, of course, fit the tuba much better than the trumpet. So that's one of the reasons I think I moved through. And I also was involved in choir. We had one of our teachers that taught some choir, and we would have performances, competitions in the spring of the year with both band as well as choir.
And these were intra-school competitions or inter-school or intra-school?
Intra-school, yeah. I think generally they were a county-wide competition.
Oh, okay.
Sure. All right. So having spent your years teaching vocational, agriculture in North Dakota. Can you recall some of those days, those stories, maybe funny stories, some incidences that you could share with us? Because you had a long teaching career, and certainly
Well,
you probably have some stories.
I think certainly I can satisfy some of the more satisfying stories.
Okay.
One thing about the vocational agriculture program is we also had the FFA, Future Farmers of America organization.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, we taught public speaking and the conduct of meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Public speaking would start out, freshman students would memorize the FFA creed. And then, of course, they would learn to recite it, and we would talk to them about pronunciation. And there too, we would have contests where they could go and participate in an FFA creed contest. And then we had an organization, a local FFA organization. We would conduct meetings maybe on a monthly basis. And all those meetings were conducted according to parliamentary procedure. Mm-hmm. So that was one neat benefit of the VOAG program, which a lot of other students didn't get, those extracurricular things. Mm-hmm. I think another thing that was very satisfying was the involvement with the local farmers. We'd have young farmer classes, and these younger farmers, well, not always younger. I had an uncle who participated back in Gackle, I think into his 60s, but they were adult farmers. That's maybe a better term. And we'd bring in specialists. We didn't necessarily teach those courses, but we'd bring in specialists to do that.
Did you work with county extension directors?
Yes, very, very closely, especially when I started at Towner. I had a close relationship. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I had one of our younger VOAG instructors. He's retired now too, but he said, how come that year in Towner, there were, I think, 6 or 7 different VOAG teachers? He says, well, I was the only teacher, but the others were all extension specialists, and we would bring them in for our adult classes.
Right, excellent.
Do you recall what some of those teaching topics were?
Various teaching topics, always something on animal science generally, what was new, crop sciences, of course, ag economics, those were. Not too much as far as ag mechanics, but we did veterinary science. We had a veterinary teacher at NDSU. Mm-hmm. He was very good about recording. He had film strips, and we would show them and bring him on by telephone, and he would explain what was going on. Yeah,
weren't you modern though? Do you happen to remember this man's name?
Shipper, I.A. Shipper.
Oh yes, he was the state vet, wasn't he? For a number of years.
I'm not sure if he was the state vet, but he was the veterinarian instructor at NDSU. Yes.
Okay.
All righty.
At that time, was VOAG open only to male students?
Yes, basically it was. That was one advantage when I moved to the school at Wyndmere. We had about 40 students in every grade level. So there were about 20 for VOAG and 20 for home economics. We would spend a little time each year, maybe 2 weeks. We would exchange students. I would teach the girls how to change tires, maybe check the oil in the car. And the home ec teacher would teach the boys a little bit about cooking and baking things.
That was very forward thinking of that school system.
Well, it certainly was. And when I think of today, I mean, all the VOAG teachers were male and the home ec were female. Today in VOAG, we have way more female teachers than males.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was welding taught in VOAG?
Yes, it was. And I was always really proud to see a student that could weld better than I could. And the goal was always to maybe at least help them career explore, because we taught engines, we taught welding, we taught carpentry, letting the students kind of identify, or as a minimum, at least prepare them when they graduated from high school that they could could go and be employable with some of
Yes.
those skills they had learned.
Did you find sometimes, excuse me, did you find sometimes that you were teaching something that you had not been taught in college, but you had been taught as a youngster on a rural farm, and so you were able to pass that on where other teachers maybe were not associated with that particular topic?
Maybe not so much that, but we definitely had strengths. I mean, my strength was ag mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
and probably crop sciences, and then livestock, those
Yeah.
three. But again, with livestock, we would have livestock judging competition.
Mm-hmm.
This is where, they would get a class of 4 animals, and then the student would have to say, this is number 1, number 2, 3, number 4. And they would have to explain their reasons why they felt that way. An excellent, excellent thing as far as learning how to public speak and think on your feet.
Yeah.
Did any of your students ever go on to be state FFA officers?
Yes. In fact, when I came to Weimer, there was one state FFA officer, and then another one went on. And in fact, when I was the local FFA advisor at Weimer, the teacher from Minot, whose team had won the contest the year before, but one of our students from Weimer was the high individual in the state FFA livestock contest.
Mm-hmm.
So that year, I took the livestock judging team to Kansas City, Missouri.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that was not my strong suit, but fortunately, I was able to travel with the NDSU livestock judging team, and so they could participate with them. And that was my first experience in Kansas City. Oh, my.
That's a different level, isn't it?
A different level. And at that time, they would clear the streets around the FFA convention of any riffraff. Of course, always we had a student or two that would wander off and get into trouble.
Oh my goodness.
They were just adventurous.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
How do you see that students who are involved with vocational agriculture, how do you see that they move forward in their life with their professions? And is there an advantage, or what is the advantage to being a part of VOAG?
Yeah, I mean, certainly a good number of those students moved forward from that high school vocational ag class into their own farming or ranching operation. And then they would improve from there, or they would go on into college and they would already know that I want to specialize in economics, or I want to go into crops, whatever it may be. Yeah, there were definite advantages, just like there are today. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So during your teaching career, how did teaching change you as an individual?
Well, I think for one thing, it improved my presentation methods, because again, in college, we had presentation classes and we were judged. And then when I was out in the local school system, we would have somebody from the ag education department at NDSU come out and help us and teach us how to organize our coursework and our teaching presentations. I remember one situation where the crops manual that I had, of course, it listed each crop individually, and I would teach barley and wheat and so forth. And this supervisor from the ag ed department says, well, you really don't have time to do that. So you just teach crops in general. You don't take each one individually.
Mm-hmm.
And back at that time, was it only small grains that were taught?
Not only in Weimer, especially, that was corn country. So there was a lot of corn raised down there.
Okay.
And that was a learning curve for me, was to learn more about corn. I moved from Towner, where it was basically small grains and livestock, down through Lemoore, where it was a combination, down into Weimer, where it was basically crops, but a lot of row crops, beans, pinto beans, soybeans. Yes, right.
Okay. And this would have been in the 1960s era or 70s?
Yeah, basically 60s and 70s. Yes.
That a lot of that has changed today, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sure.
So, did you ever get any experience or any learning about how the relationship between bees and crops and bees and how they're needed, the bees are needed?
Not a great deal, but
Okay.
that is one way in which agricultural education has really expanded.
Mhm.
I mean, goodness sakes, I didn't teach anything about horses, and now they teach horses. They teach horticulture. I did very little of that. And
Okay.
that, of course, brought in insects and how they affect it and all that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Was wide
So, when you were teaching, can you remember the time when computers came into your classroom?
They really never came into the classroom while I was teaching.
Oh, okay.
My first exposure to computers was when I joined the State Board for Vocational Education in 1971. And
Uh-huh.
then we had computers. When I was teaching, the best thing we had was a mimeograph machine.
Oh, yes.
We could type up a stencil, and then we could crank this mimeograph machine and print tests and so forth. Yeah,
And you'll never forget the aroma of that liquid, that purple
that's
liquid.
exactly right.
My Lord. Well, that was the best, and it worked. And then you mentioned film strips. I hadn't thought of them for many years. Did you use them in your classes? I said you mentioned a film strip, and I hadn't thought of them in many years. Did you use them in your class? Did your school provide film strips?
Basically, I don't think we had many film strips to use in school.
Okay.
I mean, gradually we got slides, which the extension service provided.
Oh,
Dr.
good.
Shipper, he would produce slides, send them out to us, and then we would have a slide projector and we could use them.
Yeah.
But no, not very common as far as classroom instruction was concerned.
What was your favorite part of teaching?
I think the work with the students, the individual work with students and their parents. My teaching was always a 12-month job, and that was great. I'd get into the community before the other teachers moved in. And so rather than just associating with teachers, I was busy visiting projects out on the farm. Students would have crops or livestock.
Okay.
And I would there get to meet with the students and with their parents.
Mhm.
And it helped me understand when this young boy came into the class, kind of tired, maybe with a little bit of manure on his shoes. I understood that young lad had to go out and help do chores before he was able to come to school.
Right.
Yes, I could appreciate that.
Did you ever have any students who you might have had to coached more intensely in order for them to have think highly of themselves and what they were learning? And
yeah, the coaching actually was kind of incidental, I suppose. But I think the public speaking experience, I mean, that's another contest that we would have beyond the creed. I think as students learned how to do the public speaking, they learned to think better of themselves and more highly. And then the ability to conduct meetings. I think, like, for instance, if they got into student council meetings, they know how to conduct the meeting, whereas most of the other students did not.
Do you see meetings being conducted by parliamentary procedure today in your adult life?
Some and some not. And I think it all goes back to the individuals conducting the meetings.
It does.
They learn parliamentary procedure at some point in their educational career.
And did they value it? Did they respect it? Because it is put together so that the meeting flows and things work, and you don't have any. There are ways to do things, and these ways have been proven to make a more efficient meeting. That's one of the things that kind of bothers me about how some people don't know how to conduct a meeting.
That's right.
But
if you want to discuss a topic, you have somebody make a motion, and somebody seconds the motion, and then you vote on it. And if the majority agrees that we want to talk about this, then you go ahead and discuss it. Yes.
Yeah. And the verbiage is I move, not I make a motion.
That's correct. I move that we do this, and I second that motion.
Yes.
Did you ever have VOAG students who were involved in 4-H?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And generally, we were very cooperative with the county extension program, 4-H and F of A. The only time maybe came when we had to pick members for our F of A livestock judging team, and 4-H had a livestock judging team. Yes.
But in the 4-H program, were young women judging them too?
Boy, I think it was a very limited extent. Yeah, as I remember, livestock judging was primarily a boy event.
Okay.
And now it's far from that.
Far from that, yes.
Yep.
And boys involved in home economics, likewise.
Yes. Oh,
Cooking,
yeah.
chefs, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, Bert, we're about at the end of our chat. Is in wrapping everything up, what is the most memorable for you of that decade of the 1950s?
The 1950s, I think the most memorable is the community activities we had. As I mentioned earlier, my parents, their brothers and sisters all came from Neudorf in Russia. Interestingly, too, how that name Neudorf came about. Neudorf in German, it's Neudorf, a new small community. When they moved to Russia, they debated, should we make it Neustadt or Neudorf? Neustadt is a new city. And they says, no, we're not creating a city. It's going to be a small community. But that Neudorf community was important. The township was named Neudorf, the schools were named Neudorf, and the church was named Neudorf. And we would spend a lot of time visiting aunts and uncles. And of course, there were always enough cousins for us to play with. Now, we lived about 2-3 miles outside of the real center, because those kids in the center, they would get together every Sunday afternoon and play baseball and so forth, whereas I was kind of out of that area. But I think that's the most memorable thing. Christmas time also. Our Christmas did not start until our Christmas program at church. Yes, we had a little bit of that at school, but for 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas Eve, we would practice singing and recitation. We would each have a Sprichle, a little presentation, recitation.
Yes.
But then came Christmas Eve, and that was the Christmas program. The church would be filled. We put on that program, and that was the start of it. And then after that, it was visiting for that full week at least.
Wow.
You know, afternoons, evenings. Yeah, they would take time to milk the cows in the morning and the evening. But other than that, it is devoted to visiting.
That is neat. That's
very
neat.
cool.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was neat. On a Sunday afternoon, for instance, I mean, that went on all year long. But if we wanted to go visit somebody on a Sunday afternoon, we'd have to hurry home from church and eat quickly and then go. Because if we didn't leave, sure enough, somebody would stop. And it would not be unusual for a house full of people to get together. And my mother would go and start opening canned vegetables and fruit and so forth.
Yeah.
And there was an evening meal.
Meet everybody, yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
What wonderful memories you've shared with us.
I guess.
Thank you so much for being our guest. This has been just so delightful.
It's been
Doing this.
heartwarming.
Yeah.
So friends and guests on our site, tell your friends and even your relatives about this 1950s fun chat, so they might learn something. Till next time, toodaloo.